Welcome. My name is Oladele Akogun, Professor of Public Health Parasitology at Modibo Adama University of Technology in Yola. In spite of interventions that are proved to be efficacious against infectious diseases still remain persistent. I will give examples from malaria, from onchocerciasis, and from cutaneous leishmaniasis. I will also explain how implementation research is used to address them. We start with malaria. Malaria is caused by a protozoan parasite, which is transmitted by mosquito and constitutes a major public health problem in many parts of Africa. Worldwide, there are 198 million malaria cases. 80% of this are found in Africa. Globally, there are 384,000 cases of death due to malaria. 90% of these are found in Africa. I'd like to invite you to join me and watch a video on the burden of malaria in Africa.
Nigeria. More people live here than anywhere else in Africa. This baby girl has a serious fever. It's malaria. For 2 days, Sherifat Jamoa has been giving her daughter, Grace Abba, medicine brewed from herbs and bark. Grace, who is just 3 years old, is in a bad way and needs proper treatment. But the nearest help is 26 miles away. Sherifat has no option. She has to walk. Like most women in rural Nigeria, she can't afford to take time off whenever one of her children gets sick. According to the World Health Organization, malaria claims the lives of over 270,000 children in Nigeria every year. That's a third of all the children who die of malaria in Africa.
Did you notice that access to intervention is a major hindrance reducing the burden of the disease in that video? The promise of efficacious interventions are available. Artemisinin combination therapy, an anti-malaria medicine for prompt and efficacious treatment of malaria, is available. Insecticide-treated nets, indoor residual spraying against vectors to reduce exposure to infective mosquito bites are also available. Preventive therapy for malaria risk groups, such as pregnant women, infants, are also available. Seasonal malaria chemo prevention is also available. Challenge is due to lack of access to effective treatment remains a major hindrance to prevention and treatment of malaria. Malaria treatment occurs in the home, outside the health facility. Self-medication with poor quality medicines, which are purchased from unregulated sources, abound. Less than a quarter of children receive recommended artemisinin-based chemotherapy. And between 50 to 70% of children die without contact with the health facility. Most of them die within 48 hours of onset of malaria symptom. The major problem is how to achieve universal, prompt, and effective treatment with anti-malaria within 24 hours of the onset of symptom. Another example I like to share is onchocerciasis. Onchocerciasis is caused by Onchocerca volvulus, which is transmitted by the black fly that breeds in fast-flowing rivers. This disease, also called river blindness, leads to a stigmatizing skin disease, which eventually often leads to blindness. A major health problem in Africa, 99.5% of the 37 million infected people are found in Africa. 3.5 million disability adjusted life years are lost annually as a result of onchocerciasis, leading to abandonment of otherwise very fertile agricultural lands, which leads to enormous socioeconomic loss to the region. Let us now watch a short video on the burden of onchocerciasis in Africa.
A busy market in rural Nigeria. This part of Nigeria is severely affected by a parasitic worm which damages the skin and eyes. It causes terrible itching. In the worst cases, it can make you go blind. The parasitic worms can cause terrible sores and lesions. Locals call this leopard skin. This disease is called onchocerciasis, or river blindness, because the black flies which spread the parasites to humans breed in rivers and streams.
I grew up in a place called Barua. River blindness is common there. There are lots of rivers. That's why it's so common. My father actually went blind from this disease. I was afraid that I would lose my sight as well.
River blindness affects 30 countries in Africa alone. The World Health Organization estimates that 500,000 people are blind because of it. River blindness is one of their biggest problems. Fortunately, there is a drug which can prevent the disease. It's called ivermectin. For 20 years, ivermectin has been provided free by the makers, Merck. It works by killing the young worms, known as microfilariae. A single annual dose is all that's needed to kill almost all the microfilariae in a person's body. But getting ivermectin to all the people who need it is a massive task. For millions of people in Africa, rivers and streams are their most important sources of water. But these are also the preferred breeding grounds for blackfly.
This disease affects poor populations in very difficult and remote areas. And getting these drugs to the people who need it is one of the major challenges.
Did you notice that access to free medicine was the implementation problem? Before 1987, there was no safe drug against onchocerciasis. Vector control was limited to the West African savanna. Nothing could be done about the 85% infected people. But a breakthrough occurred in 1987 when ivermectin was registered against onchocerciasis for human use. It's donated free of charge as long as needed. It is safe for large-scale treatment. Ivermectin is effective against microfilaria when taken annually for a long time. Unfortunately, it has limited effect on adult worm, which lives for between 15 to 20 years. The problem of onchocerciasis is that we require to give ivermectin every year to more than 160 million people living in 28 African countries. So the implementation problem is, how can a high annual coverage of ivermectin treatment of over 160 million people be sustained every year for over 15 years, given the fact that the people who are affected, they live in rural areas, in conflict situations, and the health system where it exists is heavily overburdened, or is too weak to take on such a burden, or there are even no health facilities at all in most of the countries and communities that are affected. The third example is cutaneous leishmaniasis. In Tunisia, rodents live in burrows and are protected by vegetation, such as this. And these rodents serve as reservoirs for cutaneous leishmania parasite. Mechanical removal of the vegetation, the chenopods, and replacement with acacia gets rid of the reservoir and, of course, the disease, cutaneous leishmaniasis. But then the problem is, chenopods are feeds for animals. So getting rid of them means there is no vegetation for grazing animals, sheep and cow. It is costly to plow on a large scale. It has impact on biodiversity. And of course, getting a multi-sectorial approach that is required for this intervention becomes a challenge to the health system. So, implementation research problem is how to implement an efficacious intervention of such a large-scale plowing in an acceptable manner. There are several other examples where the promise of efficacious intervention has had implementation problem. Insecticide-treated nets. Less than 50% of people who sleep inside these nets, despite its effectiveness. Praziquantel. Less than 14% receive treatment, despite the availability of praziquantel. TB tuberculosis diagnosis. Less than 65% diagnose and notify of cases of tuberculosis. Integrated management of dengue fever, for example. The coverage is still very low to prevent transmission, despite the integrated management approach that is available. The hygiene management of lymphatic filariasis morbidity is a technique that is available, yet only a small fraction of lymphedema cases benefit from the use of this technique. In this chapter on promise and problems of implementation against infectious diseases of poverty, we acknowledged the public health and socioeconomic problems of these diseases. We noted that efficacious interventions are available, free of charge in some cases or highly subsidized in other cases. The major hindrance to implementation is access to the promise due to the health system's inability to take advantage of the efficacious interventions that are available. In the second chapter, we shall be discussing how implementation research lives up to that promise. Thank you for your attention.